Steve wants to talk more. He might be a little.
Tonight is Tuesday, April 21st at 5:30 p.m., and I am calling the meeting to order. Could you please read the roll?
Baker. Batterman.
Here.
Comstock.
Here.
Crombie.
Here.
Drengler.
Here.
Jacobs.
Yep.
Owens.
Here.
Rosas.
Present.
And we have quorum.
Okay. Okay, next on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of March 17, 2026, Committee of the Whole meeting minutes. Can I have a motion to approve?
So move.
Okay. Do I have a second?
A second.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve and a second. Any discussion on the minutes?
I'll be abstaining.
Okay. All right. Can you please, all those in motion say aye? Aye. All those not in motion say nay. So I guess motion carries. All right. The next on the agenda is citizen appearances, public comment. I do have two citizen appearances, double or public comment from two people. And if there's anybody else out there that has something that they'd like to talk about that's not on the agenda, you can fill out forms in the back. So the first one is going to be Sunshine Anderson.
All right, good evening, everyone. And I would just like to say for a quick moment, congratulations to our newest alders, and thank you to everybody who is returning to continue your service tonight. I appreciate all of you being here. I noticed tonight that there is no discussion at either the COW meeting or the council meeting regarding a potential audit of the city administrator's office. And I figure this is due to the new council being seated and discussion may occur on May 5th. I have one brief story I want to share with you tonight to tie the staff stories that you have heard with the dollars involved. I was made aware last year that our former sustainability and resilience manager, Dr. Rose Daly, and I promise this isn't related to anything litigation right now, was asked to perform a utility audit on all city buildings and provide calculated costs so department utility budgets were data-driven and not just guesswork. As a former city employee, the way that our utility line would be set each year was by rolling over what we had set as the number the year prior. There wasn't really much data behind it. So, in doing so, Dr. Daly found that the library's utility costs for the 2026 year should not surpass $60,000. I submitted Record Request 42-2026 on February 11th, asking to see the utility audit report that was produced, and I have yet to receive it. This is not a knock on our city clerk's office. They have been incredible with all my other requests, and I know that there may be barriers to them acquiring this information. This should be where you can find confirmation of that projected amount, that report that she produced. That being said, the library's utility budget for 2026 was passed at $117,000. Okay, she said it should be about $60,000 for the year. What was passed was $117,000, and I got that from Record Request 234-2025. That is a major difference between the 2024 actual cost of just over $54,000 for the building. The 2025 budget sat at under $87,000, and that's including some, if not all, of the energy used during construction work there. I understand that might be higher for a short period. I do not know what the 2025 actual was yet, but have submitted a request for that. It makes sense that with the completion of the library and all of its sustainability features, that the utility bill should come in around $60,000. So that leaves us with a difference of $57,000 between what was budgeted and what the expected data-driven amount should have been. Now, I have heard stories explaining how this happened, but I don't say anything at this podium that I can't back up with fact. This is just another leaf that I think has been left unturned and a reason we need to look more closely at the way our city administration functions. I'm not asking you to get involved in the day-to-day, but I do think that when we look at these numbers, when we look at the stories that have come out, there is enough to be looking at more closely. On a separate note, I'd like to point out that in the Code of Conduct you will vote on later tonight, that it outlines an executive leadership team. I have your city administrator recorded saying that following the restructuring that was passed late last year, there would not be an executive leadership team anymore. I know now I was likely told that in order to support the argument that former Director of Parks, Recreation, and Forestry, Kristen Grissom, was not being demoted by her position being dropped out of the executive leadership team, because that team would no longer exist. That strikes me as another red flag. I will end this by saying I don't want to keep harping on about this. I really would like to spend my Tuesday nights out enjoying our beautiful community, but I do think that this is something worth my energy right now. And I appreciate all of the time that you have given me tonight, and I look forward to continued communication.
Thank you, Sunshine. Okay, next is Alexander Robertson. It is Robertson, right?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
I couldn't read the writing.
That's okay. Sometimes I can't either. Hello, everyone. My name is Alexander Burke Robertson, and I live at 204 Dewey Street. And I am speaking today in support of a recommendation from the Museum Board that was made on the 15th to hire a full-time LTE to manage museum volunteers. I am confident that Alder Jacobs will relay to you the particulars if he hasn't already. I understand the budgetary constraints of funding a full-time employee in 27, given the levy limit, but the funding is already there for this particular position, and I simply ask that you direct city administration to fill that vacant position. You may find in 27 that you need to reduce that to a part-time position, or you combine it with a position in Parks and Rec or something to make that math work, given the constraints. But as the chair of the museum board pointed out on the 15th, this is an 80% cut to the museum staff that we're dealing with, and no one else is being asked to take an 80% cut. I mean, come on. So let's hire this position. This is not going to work long-term if you let the museum wither on the vine. If you let it die a slow death because you don't do anything about it now, that's just a fait accompli. And that's not what we want to see. That's not what the community wants to see. So please adopt the museum board's recommendation so that there is still something to save in some small capacity in 27. That's it. That's all I got. Thanks so much, y'all.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, we don't have any other comments. Let's move on to council liaison committee member reports. Is there anybody up here that has any council liaison member reports? Alder Jacobs.
Well, particularly since this was just brought up, I'll tell you, to the best of my memory, the discussions that we had regarding the museum, the people on the board were unanimous in wanting to keep the museum open, but we are recognizing some difficulties, which is, as Alex had pointed out, money is already budgeted. A problem is that we don't know as of right now if money will be budgeted come January. It will be very difficult and perhaps even unethical to hire someone and tell them in January, maybe December 31st may be your last day. So we're recognizing that limitation, and we're asking that we get to utilize the money that's already been budgeted to hire an LTE, so that person has the understanding that theoretically December 31st that they're finished. Okay. Of course, we'd have the latitude if we wanted to continue that person on, either with fund balance, because we will save money with this person, or if this council decides to fund that position or positions next year. Okay. We were a little bit, I'm not sure what word I want to use, but we weren't decisive on full-time, and let me explain why. I think the language that we might have used was up to full-time, because we might find a person who's interested who cannot do this full-time, especially recognizing that, it would mean leaving a job that they already have, but maybe they're willing to help us out. So I think that the language that if I remember correctly, what we used was up to full-time. And even potentially, if there were two people who were part-time, then it could be equal full-time. So that's the discussion we're hoping to have, and we're hoping to expedite how quickly this can happen. I would like to refer to the city administrator, who might have some more input on this? Because I know that we had some discussions. I just don't remember where we left it.
No, that's fine. And I had included it in my report to the council, as you know, the museum board's recommendations, so you were aware of that. So what we would be looking for from a staff perspective is, if we are going to move in the direction of hiring somebody, what is the terms of that hire? And I think Alder Jacobs outlined that well, but also the purpose. Is it to continue the museum open in perpetuity? Is it to wind down operations? What would be the assignment offered to this individual over whatever period of time we can have them? What direction would we be giving them as far as the operations of the museum? Because I think the museum board, they were very focused on, we need to get the doors back open. We need to know to what extent to keep them open in perpetuity and continue to offer it as a service of the city, or to find a way to divest, or what exactly would be the purpose in hiring an individual at the museum. So we wanted to have this body, since you have not met since the referendum, kind of digest the referendum, hear the leadership team's recommendations, which were asked for by this body, as far as how we would address the shortfall in revenues that we will have over the next 3 years. And so we're proposing to do that on May 5th, which I mentioned to the museum board, that should probably occur before a decision is made on the hiring of a museum person. So.
Okay.
I just want to, I'll add a few things. So that was the main thing, but along those lines about the future of the museum, and again, this body will ultimately decide that, and the budget will have some role in that as well. But you should be aware that I think perhaps from a legal point of view, we're not required, I think Aaron shared with me, to do anything with the items that are currently in the collection, okay? But as a professional historian, I'll tell you, we have an ethical responsibility to do something with those. And I will do whatever I can to make sure that that happens if the decision is made to close the museum, which I hope it's not, if that's the decision that's made. And I will tell you that that process will be approximately a 2-year process, and you will have to pay that person more money, because I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but to my memory, our 2 employees before said they didn't want that role. There is a liaison of the State Historical Society that can help facilitate such an operation, but finding that person is not an easy job, because no one's enthused about shutting down a museum. No one wants that job. No one who does museums wants to shut down museums and find appropriate homes for all these items. So those are a couple things that I hope you keep in mind when we decide what direction is best for us.
Alder Owens, you had your hand up before.
I just had a question. At one time, the board passed a temporary policy not to accept any more items. Is that still the case or not?
Mm-hmm.
It is, okay.
Right now, we wouldn't have anyone to process them.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have anyone to actually physically collect them.
Okay,
know
I
what
just
they
wanted
are,
to
yeah.
check.
And Mayor Stocker, welcome.
Yeah,
You had something you wanted to.
I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, my apologies for being late, but I was at a ribbon cutting for Rogers Behavioral Health on the east side of Madison, which leads into ribbon cuttings. And we just had a ribbon cutting this week at our bookstore in the library that is now open, and you have to stop in if you haven't been there. It's the Read Again bookstore. So that is open, but coming up at the Sun Prairie Utility new building on May 5th, we have a ribbon cutting it's an invitation only from 10 a.m. to noon, but then we also have a public open house from 3 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. where there will be, looks like refreshments, informational materials, and staff available to answer any questions. So ribbon cutting galore. That's all I have. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on to unfinished business, consideration, discussion, and possible action on nonprofit funding policy. I know that there's a few of you that are in the audience tonight that that came here for this. If you'd like to speak on it, there's forms that you can fill out too. So I believe, Kathleen, are you going to present anything to us on this?
I have a very brief presentation just to refresh your recollection since it's been a little while since we've discussed this. So give me one moment and I will get that pulled up.
I think this is the 4th time we brought this up.
I believe this is actually meeting number 5.
Oh, 5, okay.
Who's now completed our bingo row. Alrighty, I am just seeking permission to share.
But really, I was right with the 4th time, because this is the 5th time.
Yes, that is, you are correct. We are both right there, which is always a win for us. All right, let me pull this up. Okay, so just as a reminder as to how we got here, this originated as a referral from Alder Comstock after there was a request made from a local nonprofit for nonprofit funding. We have discussed this at 4 earlier meetings, as Alder Crombie correctly pointed out. And the goal in drafting this policy is to ensure that any nonprofit funding done by the city is compliant with Wisconsin's public purpose doctrine. The intention here is that this will address both ongoing funding and future funding requests. We do have 2 outstanding requests for future funding that council postponed until adoption of a nonprofit policy. And then we also have Colonial Club, who has recently reached out, or not recently, they reached out in February requesting a funding arrangement with the city or a funding agreement. And they provided the city administrator with some additional information about the services they provide as part of that request. We do have funding agreements in place currently with both Prairie Music and Arts and community schools. In particular, the community schools contract has a lengthy termination section so that they can ensure that they can set up their operations appropriately, knowing what their funding is. So the goal would be in adopting this policy that we would have sufficient clarity to communicate with our partners about what future funding could look like or how they would seek it. As a reminder, we have no statutory obligation to fund nonprofits. That is a policy choice that you are able to make, but it is not something you are required to do under the law. We have sought feedback and received it from a number of our nonprofit partners. I think I've mentioned those at previous meetings, but they did all have the opportunity to weigh in. And I again want to thank Christina at the Chamber for helping us communicate with some nonprofits that we may have missed in our additional outreach. So just as a reminder, in the public purpose doctrine, whenever we are expending taxpayer funds, so the funds collected through the property tax levy, it must serve a public purpose. So when we're evaluating what a public purpose looks like, it needs to have that direct public benefit, support public health, safety, and welfare, which are goals as a city, and be consistent with the object of our government. Council can choose to fund organizations that make requests if they're compliant with the public purpose doctrine. Currently, we have no policy, so requests are kind of addressed as they come in, regardless of where that falls in the budget cycle. Part of the goal in a policy was to kind of have a streamlined process so that an organization would know when they would make that request, and you as council wouldn't have to be seeking funds outside of the budget cycle in order to meet requests if you wanted to grant them. So our proposed policy would cause a 501c3 or an equivalent organization, some of our local groups are a C4 or a C6, to be eligible for funding. They need to either operate in Sun Prairie or directly benefit residents of Sun Prairie, align with our strategic priorities as a city, meet the public purpose doctrine, and we also suggest that they have a track record of programming success and accountability. Again, you could choose to allocate funding during the budget process, and then we would open up an application process at the start of the budget year. When we review that application process, which Teresa Stevens, former Alder and president of the Public Library Foundation, suggested we include, we wanted to have a calendar so organizations would know, well, here's when I come in, so I know in January or February to be looking for this. I know I'll be evaluated in March, and I know I'll have that funding decision by a certain date so I can plan next year's budget. When we evaluate that, which is currently proposed to be done by a committee of staff and community members, we would look at the compliance with the public purpose doctrine, their alignment with our city priorities, what the public benefit is, the need and the impact on the community, and a few of the other factors that are listed here. I won't read them all to you. So the goal is to ensure that we're getting the best bang for our dollars by investing in this nonprofit if we choose to fund them. Council will be provided with a report of all applications, whether complete or incomplete, and timely received. Anything we receive, even if it comes in 5 minutes before the meeting, you will be made aware of so that you know who applied and not just who staff is recommending that we fund. The final funding decision on all of this rests with council. The goal is to have that committee kind of screen and score similar to how we do RFPs or RFBs. And then all organizations that receive a funding award will execute an agreement with the city that outlines both their accountability measures and their outcomes. So as an example, our current contract with community schools asks them to report on how many people they serve, how many events they're hosting, so that you know, hey, when we're doing this, we're not just funding staff, we're funding staff who are doing outreach to the people who attend those schools, who are a part of that community to help facilitate and build that neighborhood. And you see that in the report that they bring forward to us every year. As a reminder for historical funding allocations, this is what we currently have funded in the 2026 budget. We have agreements in place with community schools and Prairie Music and Arts. We do not currently have an agreement in place with Colonial Club, although they have requested one. And we don't currently have an agreement in place with Sunshine Place for this funding. We do have that donation agreement for the capital request that they made earlier this year, but we don't have one for the ongoing funding of their operation. Staff do recommend through this policy that we would address future funding either through the budget or expiration of these agreements. So for the groups that have agreements, we would discuss, how do we want to continue this? Do we want to have them apply? Do we want to terminate the agreement? That's a decision for you to make. And then any organization whose contract expires and is not renewed would have the ability to apply during our set out funding process here. We've made a number of revisions after our previous 4 discussions. So this includes what the timeline would be, as previously mentioned. Alder Baker had made a request that we include an emergency funding process so that if something came up that was unique and unanticipated, the group would have the ability to come forward. We've now further defined what an emergency means in this process so that it's clear what is an emergency request and what is a oops, I forgot request that maybe wouldn't be eligible for funding. And we also did the addition of community members to the work group so that we would have, in addition to the staff recommendations, people in the community able to come in and have a say. We do have those 2 outstanding requests that were postponed until the policy is adopted. So these were the steps we kind of have already taken. The next steps now would be for you to take a look at it and decide if you want to adopt a policy tonight. If so, do you want to adopt it as it stands? Or do you have amendments that you would like to make?
Okay. Do we have do you have any questions at all, or on this? This is the 5th time we've had this. So I think it might be time for us to make a motion and then we can have a discussion if we want to. But I know Cheryl, our newest council representative, has a question.
And having many, many years of nonprofit direction, I had many questions, and I was able to meet with Kathleen. She answered many of my questions, but one thing I would like to see added to this is to have a member of the city council participate in the work group. So I don't know how we can add that, but I think it's important because we get all the complaints. Well, maybe not all of them, huh, Aaron? But I think it's important to have a view from the council as to what's going on in the work group.
And I think right now you just had people that had fundraising experience.
Correct. So we've got 5 members of staff, and our goal with that was not necessarily to have like the people sitting at this table, but some of our staff members who are new to management or are seeking a leadership role so that they've got the opportunity to interact and present with council and grow as well. So like one of our prime examples is our sergeants at the police department. We're working really hard to develop them to be future lieutenants or assistant chiefs or chiefs. So this would give them the opportunity to kind of come before council in a low stakes team environment and get some additional presenting experience. And then we've got 3 community members who've got fundraising or nonprofit sector experience. Procedurally, to include what Alder Vatterman is requesting, I would suggest we first have a motion to adopt the policy as it stands.
Okay.
And then if that receives a second, you could then make a motion to amend.
Thank you.
And just add in the work group. I think right now it says something like 5 staff members and 3 community members appointed by the mayor. You could just insert the language as well as 1 alder selected by the council or mayor.
Okay, so would you like to make a motion?
I would love to make a motion to adopt this nonprofit funding policy as presented.
All right, is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Can you please,
Discussion?
any discussion on this then? Yes, Alder Baker.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to say first on the emergency funds, nice job. I love the addition on this, but I have some thoughts on it for our city attorney. And I think it's really kind of like adding guardrails, but something to add to that area would be like adding documentation, or what documentation expectations do we have in the way of supporting the emergency request? Because what we don't want to have happen is because they missed the funding, they request for emergency and to make that part of as though they're actually applying in the regular format. Is there a cap that can be used, or what is a cap for that? And then also clarifying the emergency funding, that it is emergency funding and it's not so we don't set a precedent. So they're not going to keep coming back for that over and over again.
Sure. So if we wanted to address those concerns, what you could do is make a motion to amend and insert specific language. So again, any cap that you would want to set on an emergency request should be set by the council. I would just caution you that if you have a cap set in policy, you're kind of tied to that cap in the future. So let's say that one of our local nonprofits experiences an absolute catastrophe due to flooding, given the crazy weather we've been having. If you set the cap at $10,000 or $50,000 and they were seeking 75 and you wanted to grant it, you could probably procedurally still do so, but you would need to amend the rules and it would make it more difficult. And in terms of documentation, we'd ask that they submit a written request, but we intentionally didn't want to make it super onerous because if a group really does have an emergency request, we didn't want them to be spending a ton of time completing paperwork. So the goal is that they would submit that written request, and then that would be evaluated by the council president and mayor to either be placed on an agenda, or if it has truly nothing to do with the city, you could then say like, hey, you're not a nonprofit, you don't qualify, we're not going to give this to a local business. So I think if you want to insert any of those amendments, I'm happy to help you craft that language on the floor.
I have one more.
Okay, sure.
Should we consider clarifying what the city funds can be used for? Can it be used for salaries, or is it just the operational side minus salaries? That's a question to...
No, I appreciate that. I think, and again, that's ultimately a policy decision for you as the council to make. I know that several of our current partners do use the funds we provide them to fund salaries.
Okay.
So if you chose to remove salaries, that would be a change in operations for those groups. But again, that's truly a policy decision for you to make. If you want to include that language, I'm also happy to help you craft an amendment.
I just think we're doing such a nice job on creating this and putting it together. I just think that we need to do it the right way the first time, make it very thorough so we don't have the chance for litigation on it later or other comments about it.
Okay. So did you want to make an amendment on that, or?
No, it was just
Or
part of
did you
the
wanna-
discussion on this. I don't know if
Okay.
I'm ready for an amendment to
Because
the
we
motion.
can always come back if we needed to. We could have Kathleen write it up for us. And,
I appreciate your comments about whether it should be, the city funding should be for salaries. A nonprofit, let me tell you, is so strapped normally that many of the grants that they apply for through public resources limit, but the money they get from, say, the county or any governmental, they're the ones that are really providing the funding for the staffing. So if we take that out of the equation, that would really be a major hindrance.
Okay. Just to respond, if I may, and I think we're getting hung up on the salary side. I'm not saying that it should be for salaries. I'm just saying, should we identify what the funds should be used for?
Oh, what they could be used
What
for.
they could be used
Okay, yes. I
for. Or
agree.
better yet, maybe even what they can't be used for.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
okay, yes, Alder Rosas.
I'd like to move an amendment here. We add an alder, part of that group.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
All right, so we have a motion to add the amendment, or to add an alder, and a second. Any other discussion? Alder Dringler?
Yeah, so either Alder Rosas or Alder Baderman, if you can just kind of explain a little bit more your intention for adding an alder to it, so you better understand the reason. I know you mentioned because we take all the blame, and that's valid, but we're going to be voting on it at the end anyway.
Right.
So are there any additional reasons why we would want an alder to do this work? So whichever.
I just think it's important because we're the eyes and the ears of the community, and so
Bingo.
it's important to participate in this process.
Okay,
I also want to add that our last meeting with Board of Public Works, we did the same thing regarding, the Pelletieri, to add an alder, because we have to kind of be the eyes and ears due to the referendum. So
Yeah, I think we do that in Parks and Rec too.
there you
So
go.
And there's at least a couple other communities that either haven't done a housing study of themselves or it's been some time. There's a few communities who have done both recently, Middleton being one. So I'm struggling to think what they might be applying for if they do. So we think that that there's going to be a fair amount of competition for these resources, but we're confident that given our track record of executing things that we've planned on doing, as well as I would look at it as the ROI of this kind of investment of what the county could invest in, that we would get something. We may not get all of what we're asking for, depending on who else is applying, but we're confident that we would get some kind of award.
And Josh, when is this required to be submitted?
It's due on Friday. So we already have a draft of what we think the scope would be. I think the key is whether you're accepting of the match or not. Otherwise, we'd be just going after federal money, and we'd be allocating staff time to a project. But as I articulated, this is something we're going to need to be doing anyway. It would allow us to do more if we're successful.
So like you, Josh, your peers also have to be in front of city councils pitching this.
Yes.
So you're not familiar with how any of those outcomes have...
Not yet, and nor do I know if every community requires the same kind of authorization. If they're not asking for a match, they may just be able to, go for it. But I'm not up to date on what is on other council agendas in the last week or so.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And you have presented this already at the Planning Commission and the Housing Committee?
We haven't talked to the Planning Commission about this. We talked to the Housing Committee about this recently, and so they're up on that because it would be housing focused,
right?
Yeah, housing and land use focused.
Okay, all right, Alder Baker.
Thank you. So one of the questions from the Housing Committee: what's the line item? What are we going to take that out of?
So there would be two places if we're using 2026 funds. We have a planning or a professional services budget in the planning division of $30,000. It was created, I believe, in 2020 originally, and the purpose was to keep our comp plan up to date. So we've used those funds in recent years to allocate towards the zoning code project and some other planning activities. So that would be one that we have some in 2026, but not all of this would be able to fit there. And the other would be the affordable housing fund. The 10-year work plan for the housing fund is to do a housing study every 5 years to keep that up to date. This would essentially accomplish that, at least for the next cycle. And it would be a allowable use of that resource. So that's a fund that's not general levy, tied. So that gives us another place to pull it. If we need to, depending on what future budgets look like, we would be able to use funding over 3 years to meet that match requirement.
The reason I was asking is one of a constituent reached out who had reviewed the agendas and they're concerned that we're not using the Affordable Housing Fund for housing. We're using it for administrative purposes, and they wanted me to be aware and share with the council that we need to focus on providing housing.
Yep, and I think the Housing Committee is really focused on both expanding supply as well as providing services for people who are pursuing housing. And there was a relatively small piece that we looked at over the 10 years that would be making sure we're on track, which such as updating our housing study, so to know kind of what the current state of the market is, and that this would fall into that category. So we expect that the housing fund is still largely going to be used for those existing services. It doesn't affect that outlook. This just allows us to potentially leverage those dollars to get additional federal resources and investment here.
Thanks for explaining that. My concern was we're looking at housing growth, and we need smart growth, not just growth, but also that we need to, for ourselves in the city, based on the referendum we just went through, our lack of referendum, is that building that foundation and that structure, and then hearing about other aspects of what's needed out there. I think that's a missing portion.
I agree. I think that one thing that you'll hear the planning staff, I'm sure others talk a lot more about, you've already started to hear it, is making sure that we're really thinking about whether the growth we're seeing puts us in a good position long-term in terms of our obligations. And in terms of housing, that largely means being more efficient with infrastructure. Generally speaking, housing, regardless of the type, has pretty similar service obligations per capita. It's the infrastructure investment that sets you out, those long-term obligations. And that's how communities have fallen behind, is we haven't had our eye on that long-term obligations. So we expect that this would be part of this comp plan update, is that we need to be much more diligent to communicating why our land use needs to be very thoughtfully in that perspective, because many communities haven't. And Sun Prairie is not unique in that respect. So there's lots of boxes we're trying to check, and one of those is we're talking about housing supply is not just any kind of supply. It's we need to meet these other objectives, and one of those is making sure that it puts us in a better position long-term financially, and at least have a much better idea what that means to the degree that we can think about these decisions long-term.
Cool. Thanks, Josh. Appreciate it.
Okay. All right. Do we have a motion then?
I'll make a motion that we move forward with this.
And I second it.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion before we vote? Okay, can you please read the roll?
Baker.
Aye.
Batterman.
Aye.
Comstock.
Aye.
Crombie.
Aye.
Drengler.
Aye.
Jacobs.
Aye.
Owens.
Aye.
Rosas. And that passes 8-0.
Okay, thank you. Next is consideration, discussion, and possible action on the 2025 year-end budget amendments. And I believe Renee is going to explain that to us, or?
So you had a list in your packet of the year-end budget amendments. I can just go through them if you would like them one by one to kind of explain, or if you have specific questions.
I think that if we have specific questions up here, we can ask Renee. That would make more sense. I'm sure that everybody has looked at it, of course, so. Yeah, so do we have any questions for Renee at all?
Yeah, Alder Baker does, so
Okay.
I can, do you want to ask them, or do you want me to just try to address as you had sent them to me?
Go right ahead.
Okay.
And
So
thanks for your patience on that. I appreciate it.
you bet. So he asked a question. The first few items are using contingency in the general fund, and he asked what our plans were versus, are we using it, is it truly for unspent, or are we not maybe doing as well as we should with projections? So contingency is just that, unexpected items, and these truly are. One of the items that we are amending is for a retirement, which the city, if it's unknown, you can't budget for it. So, and the process typically is that those are unplanned for the city, those large retirements payouts. We also had a vacancy in a position, and we budget based on what we think the market is for that position. That position can get negotiated, which is what happened with that position in the clerk's department, which is why the wages were higher there than what we anticipated and knew at the time of budget. The next item is the insurance reserve expense. This is a loss reserve, which is actually prepared by a third-party actuary. We are required under GASB Statement 10 to